Hey YouTube, it's Dimitri, and today we're going to talk about being productive and staying on task a little bit here. And I'm going to talk about this just because it's something that I've always struggled with. It's something I currently struggle with, and so we're just going to dive on in and talk about this. So when you start going into, I think like when I started my master's degree, for example, or even in undergrad when I started thinking about like, oh, I want to be a financial engineer, I want to be a quant, right? You start digging and like, you're like, oh, I want to do stochastic calculus. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I want to do, the Black-Derman toy model and work on like derivatives and fixed income. And you start deviating over here. And then you're like, oh, I need to learn time series. I need to program in Java and Python and C++ and C and C# and R and SAS and like, right, everything just starts blowing up. And there's just too much stuff to do, and a lot of people just start shutting down, or you just end up like me, and everyone always asks like, oh, Dimitri, like, what are you working on? Like, have you done this and this and this yet? Can you talk about that? And then my typical answer is like, oh, I'm just too busy, right? It's an easy excuse here to say like, oh, I'm just too busy. But a lot of it comes down to the fact that we're just not organized, and there's just too many topics, and I think this is where a lot of people fail. This is specifically where I fail, is I have a bookcase over here and it's got just a bunch of books on it that I want to read, but I literally don't have time to read them. And the truth is, it's not that I really don't have time. It's just that you get busy with other things and you have to start allotting time to specific tasks. And I think the number one thing is picking one area and focusing. And so there are three things I think that I have found helpful in trying to learn more, be more productive, but actually get value out of it instead of just like covering a bunch of stuff and checking a bunch of boxes like a lot of people end up trying to do, but end up failing just because they cover too many generic topics and never get enough depth in one area. So the first tip here is learning to align your reading and studying with your job, your work, or your school. So a lot of times, right, you have some textbook and say you're learning, I don't know, data science or something, and you're doing regression models. My advice is to actually align your personal interests with these classes. So if you're taking, for example, like these regression tree models and you're doing data science, I would do the class and do the homework, but then when you have extra time, I would actually spend that time researching and reading more material, more in depth, doing side projects, and really getting into the nitty-gritty pieces of these topics. So for example, something I would not recommend doing, which I have attempted to do, is say you're working purely on a statistics class and you're programming in R and you're doing all this like homework and stuff for it. And then you're like, you know what, Dimitri, I need to do C++ because that's going to get me the job. That's going to be great use of my time. So you're doing homework on one end and then you're trying to do C++ on the other end. And my experience is I can't do it. It's hard to do both parts. Balance your real world life, your school and everything on top of that, and then trying to study this other topic. A lot of times it's hard to connect the two, and so I think in general it's easier if you can align what you're doing at work or school, figure out what's interesting to you, and then really dive deep on the other side of it. So I think this is the first tip. I think it's very important. I think it makes my life a lot easier. It makes me better at my job because I always try to align my research, my personal interests, somewhat with what I'm doing at work, and then it actually benefits my work, and then my work actually benefits my personal research and hobbies. The second tip here is setting goals annually and semi-annually. So every year I set goals. I don't know if everyone does this or not, but I'm big into setting goals. I try to write out everything that I would like to accomplish for the year. One of the things I do is I just put like a number of books I would like to read because I always have like textbooks on my list. I have like personal interest books I'd like to read, but setting this goal kind of helps me complete this by the end of the year. And by setting these goals, I would try to be as specific as possible. So again, if you think like you really need to learn Java or something for the year, and you're trying to align this and everything, but you really want to learn it, you have to set it as a goal, I think, at the beginning of the year. And then at minimum, you need to go back to like 6 months, like end of June, beginning of July. You need to come back and reassess and think like, have I done everything that I need to do to learn Java? Am I on track? Am I meeting my goals? But for me, I think setting these goals helps me keep more responsibility because the goals are written down. So I go back and look at them and I'm like, I'm so far behind. I said I was going to do this. I just haven't had time. Again, I haven't had time, right? It's the great excuse. But then it kind of drives me more to like put more time into that topic. In general terms, I would recommend selecting 1 or 2 topics and then diving very, very deep into one area. So don't try to actually cover too many things, because you just won't complete anything and then you just will waste like an entire year's worth of time. So I would select a few areas and just set goals like I will do this, this, and this for these topics. I'm going to do that this year, and then I'll do, something else next year. The third tip I have here is literally just putting your head down and grinding. So I know this is going to sound super easy, but a lot of times I find like I pick something I'm working on and I'm learning a lot about, and then all of a sudden something comes up at work, something comes up on my LinkedIn, something comes up, through school, or one of my colleagues has a new job, and they're doing, this great and amazing thing, and it's so much better, and it's like super detailed, or it's in a different direction from where I was going. And so I kind of get like frustrated, and then I'm like, oh, I'm gonna like try to research a little bit of this. And for example, your company's going this direction. And so now what you're going to do is you're going to try to learn these new topics plus learn these old topics. And then, this person got a great new job and they're getting ahead, in data science. And this guy has a new job, doing econometric modeling for this other bank. And so like you start getting frustrated. And so my tip here, like putting your head down, is like, just ignore all of it. Like, just ignore it. For example, right now there's huge buzz in the banking industry. Everyone's like, machine learning, and there's stuff circling everywhere, and banks are convinced they're going to change the world. And like, it's a lot of buzz. There's a lot of stuff going on. I see like I have friends that are getting promoted. They're working like at Apple. They're doing, this and that. They have a new job, new titles, new promotions. And then you start thinking like, oh, should I be doing this differently? Should I be learning these other topics? My advice though on this is just keep your head down. Just ignore a lot of the nonsense. Ignore the big buzzes. So like machine learning has been going, guys, for years and years and years and years. It's just starting to take off in a bunch of different industries. And it is very, very tempting to do what everyone else is doing, which is running out and learning these packages in Python and these packages in R and just generating models haphazardly. So my advice like on these topics, if you're already learning machine learning and data science, is seriously, like I'm trying to do is just put my head down, ignore all the nonsense around me, ignore all the buzz, ignore all the overhypeness, and just focus on what you're supposed to be doing best. So learn the basics, start from the bottom and work your way up. But again, this can be very distracting. This can make you change from topic to topic. So you might think that like Python's the next new language, and then you're like, oh, forget that. Someone else said C++ is the best new language. Somebody else said Java is the best new language. Like just pick one thing. Put your head down, ignore what's going on around you, and just focus in on that and really, really learn something very well. And then after that, then you can come up for a breath of air and start looking around and saying, okay, I have Python nailed down. What is the industry wanting? Is Python great? Should I switch gears and do something else? Or should I keep going deeper into Python or R, whatever your goal is? So I have 2 tips for actually learning better. The first one is doing projects. So I know a lot of people say this, like, oh, just go out and do a project, and it's hard to define a project. But if you can pick a project, something that's a long-term project that'll take more than a day, more than a week, it should take you at least a few months. If you can pick these projects and kind of set them up and design them, so designing the project is going to take you time, especially if it's worthwhile. And then the second part is actually solving this. And so if you can solve these problems and these projects, it adds a lot of value, because as you're going through these steps to solve these bigger problems that are more complex, you'll learn more about what you're doing. So again, if you're doing data science and you start off and you have to, use R, and you have to use like data cleaning, you have to do processing, you have to look at algorithms and which algorithm should you use and how to optimize the data and which type of model should you do and like how to measure output and results and fitting, right? All these different steps are going to layer into making you better at what you're doing. And if you have another goal, so you're learning like a language, right? Doing these projects is going to tie in both like the computer programming side, it's going to tie in the data science side, it's going to tie in a bunch of different topics. And so I feel like you can learn all the important keys to doing a project, because you have to know how to do all these different parts to make it successful. And for me, doing projects has been one of the most, stimulating tracks for self-learning. I always stay on task. I always want to complete it. I always want to finish it and then have like some result at the end. And even if the results suck, I have found that doing these projects has made me far more I guess, adapt and like learn a lot deeper the concepts. And so it's easier for me to actually teach people how to do this because I've done it myself in a step-by-step fashion. And the second tip is something that I've been doing recently, which is writing guides. So when I make YouTube videos for you guys, or I do examples, or even like at work when I'm writing like guides and documents occasionally. If people use them, great. If not, right, it's a good learning experience for myself. Writing guides is essentially the concept of having to teach somebody. So a lot of times you can't find somebody to teach. Like I can't just run out there and be like, hey, you know, like let me teach you how to do neural networks real quick. Like A, people don't have the time. B, it's hard to find people with the same interests. So writing a guide, I feel like, is a way to actually teach somebody, but in like a paper format. And even better is if you can write the guide, is give it to somebody else, like a colleague, a classmate, have them read it and see what they think. If they say like, oh, it's convoluted, it makes no sense, don't get frustrated, have them make recommendations, go back and edit, right? That editing process will make you think deeper. It'll make you see how other people think about problems. It will help enhance your learning as well. Anyways, those are my tips on kind of self-learning and focusing, and I think this is my biggest problem. As I mentioned, I get too many projects going, so definitely try to scale back, like only do a few projects, don't start new projects until you finish these projects, and try to keep things on track and kind of in a cohesive realm so everything kind of connects together, and so your knowledge base builds as a whole instead of learning little pockets of things but not really understanding how to put them together. Anyways, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and as always, until next time.